In this video, we're breaking down 2 hours of Family Guy fan theories that are way too disturbing to sleep through. Let's get into it. Family Guy has been on the air since 1999, entertaining millions with its cutaway gags, pop culture references, and the chaotic misadventures of the Griffin family in the fictional town of Quahog, Rhode Island. For over 2 decades, we've watched Peter Griffin bumble through life, Stewie plot world domination, Brian pontificate about literature and politics, and Lois hold together a family that should have collapsed under its own dysfunction years ago. On the surface, it's just another animated sitcom, a show meant to make you laugh at absurd situations and politically incorrect humor. But scratch beneath that surface, and you'll find something far more unsettling. The thing about Family Guy is that it has never played by conventional rules. Seth MacFarlane created a show that gleefully breaks the fourth wall, acknowledges its own existence as a television program, and pushes boundaries in ways that other animated series wouldn't dare. This self-awareness opens up a unique space for interpretation, a space where fans have developed theories that transform the show from a simple comedy into something genuinely disturbing. These aren't just casual observations or funny headcanons. Some of these theories, when you really examine the evidence scattered throughout hundreds of episodes, reveal implications that are downright chilling. When someone dismisses these theories with, "It's just a cartoon," they're missing the entire point. Yes, Family Guy is an animated comedy, but it's also a show that has spent 22 seasons building a complex universe with its own internal logic, continuity errors that might not be errors at all, and patterns that emerge when you look at the bigger picture. The show's writers are remarkably intelligent, often more clever than they're given credit for. They've woven in references to philosophy, classic literature, historical events, and cultural criticism that go far beyond simple jokes. It's entirely possible, even likely, that some of these darker interpretations aren't accidents. They might be intentional layers hidden beneath the comedy, waiting for viewers to discover them. The journey from lighthearted family sitcom to dark psychological thriller isn't as far as you might think. Family Guy has always had an edge, a willingness to go to places that feel uncomfortable. Remember the episode Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, which aired on the 30th of October 2011 during season 10. That episode dealt with domestic violence in a way that was shockingly serious for the show, barely containing any humor at all. Or consider Brian and Stewie from season 8, which aired on the 2nd of May 2010. That bottle episode stripped away all the typical Family Guy trappings and forced viewers to confront the genuine emotional connection between a baby and a dog, including a scene where Stewie contemplates suicide. These aren't isolated incidents. They're evidence that Family Guy has always been capable of diving into genuinely dark territory. The fan theories we're going to explore take this darkness and expand it exponentially. They take the show's established elements, the running gags, the character behaviors, the world-building details, and construct narratives that recontextualize everything you thought you knew about the Griffin family. Some of these theories suggest that Quahog itself is a kind of prison, a purgatorial space where characters are trapped in cycles they can't escape. Others propose that certain characters aren't real at all, that they're projections or delusions created by traumatized minds. Still others argue that the show's violence and chaos aren't just comedy. They're symptoms of something fundamentally broken in the show's universe. What makes these theories particularly effective is how well they fit with what we see on screen. Family Guy has a notorious disregard for continuity. Characters die and come back with no explanation. Major life events happen and are then completely forgotten by the next episode. The family's house gets destroyed and rebuilt constantly. Peter has held dozens of different jobs, each forgotten as soon as the episode ends. Stewie's intelligence and abilities fluctuate wildly depending on what the plot requires. On a surface level, These inconsistencies are just the nature of animated sitcoms, where the status quo must be maintained for the show to continue functioning. But what if there's more to it? What if these inconsistencies are actually clues pointing toward a darker truth about the nature of the show's reality? Consider the violence in Family Guy. Peter gets into fight after fight, often with a giant chicken named Ernie. These battles are spectacular, destructive, and often last for several minutes of screen time. Buildings collapse, vehicles explode, innocent bystanders are caught in the crossfire, and then the next scene begins, and everything is fine. No consequences, no arrests, no trauma. The show treats catastrophic violence as a reset button that can be pressed without any lasting impact. This could just be cartoon logic, the same way Wile E. Coyote survives falling off cliffs in Looney Tunes. But in a show as self-aware as Family Guy, a show that often comments on its own nature, could this constant cycle of violence and reset be pointing to something more sinister? Could it be evidence that the characters are trapped in some kind of loop, forced to repeat their worst behaviors endlessly? Or look at how the show handles death. Characters in Family Guy die all the time, both in cutaway gags and in the main narrative. But death never seems permanent, except when it serves a specific story purpose. Brian died in the episode Life of Brian, which aired on the 24th of November, 2013, during season 12, and the show played it completely straight. The family grieved. They got a new dog named Vinny, and for 2 episodes, Brian was genuinely gone. Then, in Christmas Guy, which aired just a few weeks later on the 15th of December 2013, Stewie used time travel to undo Brian's death, bringing him back as if nothing had happened. The show literally demonstrated that it has the power to reverse death, to undo tragic events whenever it wants. This raises an uncomfortable question. If death can be undone so easily, what does death even mean in this universe? And if death is meaningless, what does that say about the value of life in Quahog? The town of Quahog itself deserves scrutiny. It's supposedly a normal Rhode Island town, but it's anything but normal. Quahog contains every possible building and location the writers need for any given episode. Need a research facility? Quahog has one. Need a television studio? Right there in town. Need a maximum security prison? Just down the road. The town's population seems to be whatever the plot requires, sometimes feeling like a small community where everyone knows each other, other times functioning like a major city with millions of residents. The mayor, Adam West, was literally a delusional former actor who believed he had superpowers, and yet he ran the city for years with apparently no one questioning it. Mayor West, voiced by the late Adam West himself, died in the show after the real Adam West passed away in 2017, and the show handled it with genuine emotion in the episode Adam West High, which aired on the 1st of October 2017 during season 16. But even beyond Mayor West's delusions, Quahog is home to some of the most dysfunctional, violent, and disturbed individuals you'll find in any fictional town. The Griffin's neighbors include a man who communicates primarily through sexual innuendo, a family whose son is constantly abused and humiliated, and various other characters who seem to exist solely to demonstrate humanity at its worst. The show has featured serial killers, domestic abusers, corrupt police officers, and countless other criminals, all living in this one small town. If you actually mapped out all the terrible things that happen in Quahog over the course of the series, it would make the town look like one of the most dangerous places in America, a hotbed of crime and dysfunction that rivals any real-world city known for violence. This brings us to one of the most fundamental questions underlying many fan theories. Is Quahog even real? Or is it a construct, a representation of something else entirely? Some theories suggest that Quahog is a shared delusion, a kind of mental space where damaged psyches project their worst fears and impulses. Others propose that it's a purgatory, a place where souls are sent to work through their sins by repeatedly living out their worst behaviors. Still others argue that Quahog is a simulation, an artificial reality created for unknown purposes, with the Griffin family serving as test subjects for some kind of cosmic experiment. These theories gain traction when you consider how the show treats reality itself. Family Guy is famous for its cutaway gags, those moments where the action stops and we're transported to a completely different scene, often from a different time period, or even a different universe. These cutaways are usually framed as Peter, or another character remembering something, but they can't all be memories. Many of them depict events that couldn't possibly have happened, scenarios that are physically impossible or take place in contexts where the characters couldn't have been present. The show never explains how these cutaways work or why they happen. They're just accepted as part of Family Guy's reality. Another way the show breaks its own rules. But what if the cutaways aren't just a storytelling device? What if they're evidence of the fractured nature of the show's reality? Proof that the universe of Family Guy is fundamentally unstable. If the narrative can be interrupted at any moment to show us something completely unrelated, if time and space can be violated so casually, then what does that say about the reality the characters inhabit? It suggests a world where nothing is solid, where the rules of existence can be rewritten on a whim, where identity and experience are fluid and unreliable. This fluidity extends to the characters themselves. Peter Griffin is perhaps the most obvious example. In early seasons, Peter was foolish, but generally well-meaning, a working-class father who made mistakes but ultimately cared about his family. As the show progressed, Peter became increasingly cruel, selfish, and destructive. He's abused his wife, endangered his children, destroyed his friendships, and caused harm to countless innocent people, all while showing little to no remorse. The show occasionally acknowledges this character shift, with other characters commenting on how Peter has changed, but it never explains why or offers any path toward redemption. Peter just keeps getting worse, season after season, as if he's devolving into some kind of monster. Lois Griffin has undergone her own transformation. She started as the voice of reason in the family, the responsible adult who tried to keep everyone on track. But over time, Lois has revealed herself to be just as flawed and potentially dangerous as Peter. She's cheated on her husband, she's been willing to abandon her family for personal gain, and she's demonstrated a capacity for violence and manipulation that rivals anyone in Quahog. The episode Lois Kills Stewie, which aired on the 4th of May, 2008, during Season 6, showed Lois in a two-part storyline where she tracked down and killed her own son after he took over the world. Even though that story turned out to be a simulation, it demonstrated that the capacity for such darkness exists within her character. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, the children in the Griffin family present their own disturbing patterns. Meg Griffin has been the target of abuse from her entire family for the show's entire run. She's mocked, belittled, ignored, and sometimes physically harmed by her own parents and siblings. The show treats this as comedy, as if Meg simply deserves to be treated this way because she's awkward and unpopular. But when you really think about what's being depicted, it's a portrait of severe psychological abuse that would cause lasting trauma to any real person. Meg has attempted suicide, she's developed violent tendencies, and she's internalized the message that she has no value. In the episode Dial Meg for Murder, which aired on the 27th of January 2008, during Season 6, Meg returns from prison, transformed into a violent criminal who terrorizes her family, showing what happens when years of abuse finally push someone too far. Chris Griffin, the middle child, is often overlooked in discussions of the family's dysfunction, but he's equally troubled. He's portrayed as dim-witted like his father, But he's also shown disturbing behaviors, including violence, stalking tendencies, and an unhealthy relationship with his own body as he goes through puberty. The show has depicted Chris as potentially dangerous, capable of snapping under the right circumstances. He's been influenced by evil monkeys living in his closet. He's developed obsessive fixations on girls who reject him, and he's demonstrated that he inherited his father's capacity for destructive behavior. And then there's Stewie Griffin, the baby who might be the most disturbing character of all. Stewie's very existence raises questions that the show has never adequately answered. He's a 1-year-old infant with the intellect of a super genius, the capability to build time machines and advanced weaponry, and a personality that shifts between homicidal villain and sensitive soul depending on the episode. The show has never explained how Stewie became this way, or what he actually is. Different episodes contradict each other about whether other characters can understand him or if he's just babbling like a normal baby. His sexuality is treated as a running joke, with episodes suggesting he might be gay, while others show him attracted to women, and still others implying he's too young to have a sexual orientation at all. Stewie is a walking contradiction, a character who shouldn't exist but does, and the show's refusal to explain him only makes him more unsettling. The fan theories we're about to explore take all of these unsettling elements, all of these contradictions and dark moments and disturbing implications, and weave them into coherent narratives that transform Family Guy from a comedy into something much darker. These theories ask us to look beyond the jokes and see the tragedy, the horror, and the existential dread lurking beneath the surface. They challenge us to consider that maybe, just maybe, the darkness was there all along, hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone to notice it and pull it into the light. What we're about to uncover might change how you see the show forever, revealing truths that you can never unsee. The Griffin family's story might not be the harmless comedy you thought it was, and Quahog might be far more sinister than its cheerful New England facade suggests. Let's begin with the youngest member of the Griffin family, the character who might hold the key to understanding just how broken this universe really is. Stewie Griffin, the football-headed infant with a British accent and dreams of matricide, represents one of the most perplexing elements of Family Guy's entire mythology. His existence defies explanation, and the deeper you examine his character, the more disturbing the implications become. The most prevalent theory about Stewie suggests that he's trapped in a time loop, condemned to repeat his infant existence forever. This theory emerges from one of the show's most persistent mysteries. Why doesn't Stewie age? Every other character in the show has experienced some form of temporal progression, even if it's inconsistent. We've seen flashbacks to when the kids were younger, flash forwards to potential futures, and episodes that acknowledge the passage of time. But Stewie remains perpetually 1 year old, frozen in infancy despite the show running for over 2 decades of real-world time. The time loop theory proposes that Stewie is aware of this temporal prison. His advanced intelligence, his obsession with time travel, and his desperate attempts to escape his circumstances all point to a character who understands he's trapped. Think about how many episodes revolve around Stewie building time machines or dimension-hopping devices. The Road to episodes, starting with Road to Rhode Island, which aired on the 30th of May 2000 during Season 2, became a recurring series where Stewie and Brian travel through time and space. Road to the Multiverse from Season 8 showed them jumping between alternate universes. Roads to Vegas from Season 11, which aired on the 29th of September 2013, depicted them creating parallel timelines. These aren't just fun adventures. They're evidence of Stewie's desperate need to break free from his circumstances. Consider what Stewie's life actually consists of. He's stuck in a baby's body with an adult mind. He can't communicate effectively with most people. He's dependent on caregivers who often neglect or misunderstand him. He's subjected to the indignities of infancy, wearing diapers, being talked down to, having no autonomy or control over his life. For someone with his intelligence, this existence would be torture. The time loop theory suggests that Stewie has lived through this same year of infancy thousands, maybe millions of times. Every loop, he gains a little more knowledge, becomes a little more desperate, tries a little harder to escape. His inventions become more sophisticated, his plans more elaborate, but nothing works. He's always pulled back to the beginning, forced to repeat the cycle. This would explain his violent tendencies and his initial obsession with killing Lois. In early seasons, Stewie's primary goal was matricide. He built weapons, developed elaborate schemes, and frequently declared his intention to murder his mother. The show played this for comedy, treating a baby's murder plots as absurd rather than genuinely threatening. But what if Stewie's desire to kill Lois isn't about hatred at all? What if he believes that killing his mother is the key to breaking the loop? In his twisted logic, perhaps he thinks that if he can eliminate Lois, the person who gave birth to him and keeps him trapped in infancy, he might be able to escape his temporal prison and finally grow up. The evidence for the time loop becomes even more compelling when you examine episodes that deal directly with time travel. In Back to the Pilot, which aired on the 13th of November 2011 during Season 10, Stewie and Brian travel back to the very first episode of Family Guy. They interact with past versions of the family, and even change certain events. But despite these changes, the timeline doesn't fundamentally alter. The show continues on the same path it always has. This suggests that the timeline of Family Guy is fixed, immutable, resistant to change. No matter what Stewie does, he can't break free from the predetermined narrative. He's a prisoner of the show's format itself. But the time loop theory is just the beginning. Another deeply unsettling theory proposes that Stewie isn't real at all. According to this interpretation, Stewie is a figment of Brian's imagination, a projection created by the dog's deteriorating mental state. This theory stems from one fundamental observation. Brian is the character who interacts with Stewie most consistently and most meaningfully. Their relationship forms the emotional core of many episodes. They go on adventures together. They have deep conversations. They depend on each other in ways that seem to transcend the typical family dynamics of the show. The Brian imagines Stewie theory suggests that Brian, struggling with loneliness, depression, and a sense of not fitting in with either the human or animal world, has created Stewie as a coping mechanism. Think about Brian's position in the Griffin family. He's a dog who acts human, talks like a human, and wants to be treated as human, but he's constantly reminded of his status as a pet. He's intellectually superior to most of the family, but is rarely taken seriously. He's in love with Lois, but can never be with her. He's an aspiring writer who never succeeds. His life is defined by unfulfilled potential and constant disappointment. In this context, Stewie represents everything Brian wishes he could be. Stewie is brilliant and recognized as such. He builds incredible machines and accomplishes impossible feats. He travels through time and space, experiencing adventures that Brian could never have on his own. Stewie doesn't care about social acceptance or fitting in. He's confident, capable, and free from the existential dread that plagues Brian. By imagining Stewie, Brian gives himself a companion who understands him, a partner in adventure, and a way to vicariously experience the freedom and power he lacks in his own life. This theory explains several strange aspects of how Stewie functions in the show. Most notably, it addresses the confusion about who can understand Stewie and when. In some episodes, every character can understand him perfectly. In others, only Brian seems to hear him as speaking English, while other family members just hear baby noises. The show has never provided a consistent explanation for this. Seth MacFarlane has even said in interviews that the rule is essentially, whoever needs to understand Stewie for the plot can understand him. But what if the real explanation is that only Brian can truly understand Stewie, because Stewie only exists in Brian's mind? When other characters seem to understand him, it's because Brian is projecting his delusion onto the scene, interpreting events through his own fractured perception of reality. The Brian and Stewie episode from Season 8 provides crucial evidence for this theory. That bottle episode, which aired on the 2nd of May, 2010, trapped Brian and Stewie alone in a bank vault for the entire runtime. No other characters appear. The entire episode is just the two of them, talking, arguing, sharing intimate moments, and confronting their deepest fears. Brian even attempts suicide by eating Stewie's feces, thinking it's chocolate, only to be saved by Stewie performing emergency surgery. This episode strips away all the typical Family Guy elements and forces us to confront the raw relationship between these two characters. But what if we were actually watching Brian alone in a vault, having a complete psychological breakdown, talking to himself, and acting out scenarios with an imaginary infant? The death of Brian in Season 12 takes on new meaning through this lens. When Brian was hit by a car in Life of Brian, the show treated it as a real death. The family grieved genuinely. Stewie was devastated, losing his best friend and partner. But Stewie couldn't use time travel to save him because he had conveniently dismantled his time machine in the previous scene. The family got a new dog named Vinny, voiced by Tony Sirico, who integrated into the family as a Brian replacement. Then, 2 episodes later in Christmas Guy, Stewie encountered a past version of himself at a Christmas store, stole that past Stewie's time travel device, and brought Brian back from the dead. If Stewie is Brian's imaginary creation, this sequence of events represents Brian's complete mental breakdown and recovery. The destruction of the time machine represents Brian losing his ability to cope, his fantasy world collapsing. Brian's death is a symbolic suicide, Brian giving up on life entirely. The introduction of Vinny represents an attempt to replace the old Brian with a new persona, a different way of being. But ultimately, Brian can't sustain this new identity. He resurrects his old self, bringing back both Brian the dog and Stewie the imaginary infant, because he needs them to function. The whole arc becomes a metaphor for a suicidal episode and recovery, played out through the lens of cartoon logic. This theory also explains why Stewie's characterization has shifted so dramatically over the course of the show. Early Stewie was a villain, obsessed with murder and world domination. He was cruel, calculating, and genuinely threatening despite his infantile appearance. But as the series progressed, Stewie softened considerably. He became more sympathetic, more vulnerable, more openly emotional. His relationship with Brian deepened, becoming the show's most consistently genuine connection. He stopped trying to kill Lois and instead became more interested in his own identity, his sexuality, his place in the world. This evolution mirrors Brian's own emotional journey, suggesting that Stewie changes because he's a reflection of Brian's psychological state. As Brian becomes more depressed and introspective, so does his imaginary friend. But there's an even darker interpretation of Stewie's existence, one that suggests his intelligence isn't a gift, but a curse, a manifestation of severe mental instability. This theory proposes that Stewie is actually a profoundly disabled infant whose genius is a delusion, either his own or as perceived by the family. In this reading, what we see as Stewie's inventions and adventures are actually psychotic episodes, hallucinations experienced by a severely mentally ill baby, or misinterpreted by family members trying to make sense of his erratic behavior. Consider how Stewie's capabilities make no logical sense. A 1-year-old infant, regardless of intelligence, wouldn't have the physical ability to build complex machinery. He wouldn't have access to the materials, the tools, or the workspace necessary for his inventions. He wouldn't be able to reach things, manipulate small components, or operate equipment designed for adult hands. The show handwaves these practical concerns, but they point to something troubling. What if none of it is real? What if Stewie's time machines are actually just broken appliances he's playing with? What if his weapons are toys? What if his sophisticated dialogue is actually incoherent babbling that we, the audience, are meant to interpret as genius? This interpretation is supported by episodes that explicitly question Stewie's capabilities. In Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, a direct-to-DVD movie released in 2005 that was later aired as 3 episodes in Season 5, Stewie travels to the future and meets his teenage self. Future Stewie has completely normal intelligence for his age, no longer a super genius, and works at a stereo store. When present Stewie asks what happened to all his inventions and plans, future Stewie dismisses them as the fantasies of childhood. This future version suggests that Stewie's genius phase was temporary, something he would grow out of, which raises the question, was it ever real to begin with? The mental illness theory becomes even more disturbing when you consider Stewie's sexuality and identity. The show has consistently portrayed Stewie with effeminate mannerisms and has included numerous jokes suggesting he might be gay. Episodes have shown him attracted to male characters, uncomfortable with traditionally masculine activities, and more interested in stereotypically feminine pursuits. But Stewie is 1 year old. An infant doesn't have a sexual orientation yet. The show's treatment of Stewie's sexuality would be inappropriate if applied to a real baby, which suggests that what we're watching isn't meant to be taken literally. Perhaps Stewie's apparent awareness of his own sexuality represents a confused, developing mind trying to understand identity in ways that wouldn't be possible for a real infant. His advanced awareness could be a symptom of disordered development rather than genius. The show has even hinted at this darker interpretation directly. In Send In Stewie Please, which aired on the 11th of March 2018 during Season 16, Stewie spends the entire episode in a therapy session with Dr. Cecil Pritchfield, voiced by Sir Ian McKellen. The episode is structured as a one-on-one conversation where Stewie discusses his feelings, his relationships, and his struggles. Dr. Pritchfield challenges Stewie's perceptions and forces him to confront uncomfortable truths about himself. The episode ends ambiguously, with Stewie leaving the session, but the viewer unsure whether he's actually gained any insight or changed at all. This episode's existence suggests that even the show acknowledges Stewie needs psychiatric help, that his behavior and thought patterns are not those of a healthy individual, even by the standards of a cartoon genius. Another element that supports the mental illness theory is Stewie's lack of consistent goals. His supposed mission to kill Lois was abandoned without explanation. His plans for world domination are mentioned less and less as the series continues. His inventions become more inconsistent, sometimes capable of incredible feats, and other times failing at basic functions. A true genius would show progression, building on previous knowledge and working toward defined objectives. But Stewie's abilities and goals shift randomly, suggesting that we're not watching a coherent genius at work, but rather a disturbed mind, cycling through different fixations and delusions. The teddy bear Rupert represents another unsettling aspect of Stewie's character. Rupert is Stewie's constant companion, the one consistent element across all versions of the character. Stewie treats Rupert as sentient, having conversations with the bear and often asking for Rupert's opinions. The show presents this as a typical childhood behavior, imaginary friends being common among young children. But Stewie's relationship with Rupert goes beyond normal childhood imagination. He's genuinely attached to this inanimate object in ways that suggest deep psychological dependence. Multiple episodes have shown Stewie becoming devastated when separated from Rupert, going to extreme lengths to retrieve the bear. In Love Blackshally, which aired on the 1st of October, 2006, during Season 5, Stewie becomes so distraught about Rupert's absence that he experiences what appears to be a complete breakdown. If Stewie is mentally unstable, Rupert might represent his only stable connection to reality, a grounding object that helps him maintain some sense of identity and continuity. The bear never changes, never judges, never abandons him. In a world where Stewie's perceptions might be completely unreliable, Rupert is the one constant he can depend on. This extreme attachment to an inanimate object is actually a symptom of several developmental and mental health disorders, suggesting that Stewie's relationship with Rupert is less cute and more concerning than the show typically presents it. The various Road to episodes take on a different meaning when viewed through the lens of mental illness. If Stewie is experiencing psychotic episodes or elaborate delusions, these interdimensional adventures could be dissociative episodes where he completely loses touch with reality. The detailed nature of these hallucinations, the consistency of Brian's presence in them, and the fantastic elements that couldn't possibly be real all point toward a mind constructing elaborate fantasy worlds to escape from an unbearable reality. The fact that these episodes always end with Stewie and Brian back home, with no one else aware of what happened, suggests that these adventures exist only in Stewie's mind, or possibly in Brian's mind, if we accept the theory that Brian imagines Stewie. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, one of the most chilling aspects of all these Stewie theories is what they suggest about the Griffin family's awareness and response. If Stewie is trapped in a time loop, why doesn't anyone notice? If he's Brian's hallucination, why does the rest of the family interact with him? If he's mentally ill, why isn't he receiving treatment? The answer might be that the family is deeply dysfunctional and neglectful, so self-absorbed and damaged that they can't or won't acknowledge Stewie's true condition. Lois, in particular, should recognize if something is wrong with her infant son. But throughout the series, Lois has demonstrated a disturbing capacity to ignore problems within her family. She enables Peter's destructive behavior, she participates in the abuse of Meg, and she often prioritizes her own desires over her children's well-being. If Stewie is suffering from severe mental illness or developmental disorders, Lois might be in denial, unable to face the reality that her youngest child is profoundly unwell. The show has depicted Lois as someone who desperately wants to maintain the appearance of a normal, functional family, even when reality proves otherwise. Acknowledging Stewie's true condition would shatter that illusion. Peter's response, or lack thereof, is equally telling. Peter has been shown to be a neglectful father at best, and an abusive one at worst. He forgets his children exist for extended periods. He prioritizes his own entertainment over their safety. He's caused them direct harm through his selfishness and stupidity. If Stewie is trapped in some kind of supernatural time loop or experiencing delusions that manifest as impossible inventions, Peter wouldn't notice or care. He's too self-centered to pay attention, too ignorant to recognize the signs, and too irresponsible to take action even if he did notice something wrong. The siblings' relationships with Stewie are also suspect. Meg occasionally interacts with Stewie, sometimes seeming to understand him fully, and other times treating him like a normal baby. But Meg is so damaged by her own abuse and isolation that she might not have the capacity to recognize Stewie's issues. Or she might see them and feel powerless to help. Chris shows even less awareness, often seeming confused by Stewie's behavior when he acknowledges it at all. The lack of genuine concern or intervention from Stewie's siblings suggests either that his condition isn't visible to them, or that the family's dysfunction prevents them from responding appropriately. This brings us to a meta-theory that encompasses all the others. Stewie's existence is impossible because Family Guy is a show about impossibility, about a world where the rules don't work correctly and people are trapped in situations that shouldn't exist. Stewie is the embodiment of the show's broken logic, a character who represents the fundamental wrongness at the heart of Quahog's reality. He's too smart to exist, but does anyway. He's too powerful to be ignored, but is anyway. He's too young to have the experiences he has, but has them anyway. Every contradiction in Stewie's character points to the larger contradiction of Family Guy itself. A show that asks us to laugh at things that should horrify us, to accept impossibilities as normal, and to ignore the suffering happening right in front of us. If we accept this meta-theory, then all of Stewie's stories become allegories for the human condition as depicted in Family Guy. His time loop represents how we all repeat the same mistakes endlessly. His imaginary nature represents how we construct false realities to cope with unbearable truths. His mental illness represents the fundamental brokenness of existence in a universe that doesn't make sense. Stewie isn't just a character. He's a symbol, a warning, a mirror held up to the audience, showing us what we've been watching all along. A chronicle of suffering dressed up as entertainment, with a baby genius as the prophet revealing the truth beneath the jokes. Brian Griffin, the white Labrador who walks on two legs and fancies himself an intellectual, might be the most tragic figure in the entire Griffin family. While Stewie's theories force us to question reality itself, Brian's theories ask us to confront something even more disturbing: the possibility that we've been watching a dead dog's ghost for years. Or worse, that Brian's entire existence is a performance hiding a level of despair so profound that death might be the only escape he's ever truly wanted. The theory that Brian is already dead has gained substantial traction among fans who've been paying attention to the show's darker undertones. This isn't about the temporary death in Season 12 that we discussed earlier. This theory suggests that Brian died much earlier in the series, possibly even before the show began, and everything we've watched since has been the family's collective delusion or Brian's own ghostly existence as he refuses to accept his death and move on. The evidence for this theory starts with Brian's fundamental impossibility as a character. He's a dog who acts completely human. He walks upright, drives a car, drinks alcohol, dates human women, writes novels, and engages in complex philosophical discussions. The show has never explained how Brian became this way. Other dogs in the Family Guy universe are normal dogs who behave like animals. Even when the show has introduced other talking animals, they're typically presented as unusual or supernatural. But Brian's human-like behavior is treated as completely normal by everyone around him, with no origin story, no explanation, no acknowledgement that he's fundamentally different from every other dog in existence. What if the reason Brian can do all these impossible things is because he's not bound by the rules of physical reality anymore? Ghosts in fiction often appear as they wish to be seen, manifesting in forms that reflect their self-perception rather than their true nature. Brian sees himself as human, as an intellectual equal to people rather than a pet. So his ghost takes a form that reflects this self-image. The family accepts this impossible version of Brian because they're processing their grief, their minds constructing a version of their beloved pet that allows them to keep him around even after death. This theory explains several bizarre aspects of how Brian functions in the show. He's incredibly resistant to consequences that should affect him. He's been in countless accidents, survived situations that would kill a normal dog, and experienced things that should have lasting physical or psychological effects. Yet he always returns to his baseline state. If Brian is already dead, these near-death experiences aren't actually dangerous to him, because you can't kill what's already deceased. He's invulnerable because he's a ghost, going through the motions of life without actually being alive. Consider Brian's relationship with alcohol. He's a severe alcoholic, drinking martinis constantly throughout the series. For a dog, even a large one, the amount of alcohol Brian consumes should be lethal. Dogs metabolize alcohol differently than humans, and even small amounts can be toxic to them. Brian drinks enough alcohol in a single episode to kill several dogs, Yet he suffers nothing more than hangovers and occasional embarrassing drunk behavior. If Brian is dead, his drinking isn't actually affecting a living body. It's a phantom addiction, a ghost going through the motions of a vice he had in life, unable to achieve real intoxication because there's no living nervous system to intoxicate. The show has also depicted Brian dying, or nearly dying, more than almost any other character. Beyond the famous Season 12 death, Brian has been shot, stabbed, poisoned, and injured in countless ways across the series. He's survived falls that should have killed him, accidents that should have left him permanently disabled, and illnesses that should have been fatal. The show treats this as cartoon logic, but what if it's evidence that Brian can't truly die because he's already crossed that threshold? Each death is just another reminder of his actual state, a momentary glimpse behind the veil before the delusion reasserts itself, and Brian continues existing as a ghost. His constant depression and substance abuse take on a darker meaning through this lens. Brian isn't just an unhappy intellectual struggling with life's disappointments. He's a soul trapped between life and death, aware on some level that he doesn't truly exist anymore, but unable to fully accept or escape his condition. His drinking, his failed relationships, his inability to achieve his goals, all of it represents a spirit trying desperately to feel alive when it knows, somewhere deep down, that it's already dead. The existential angst that Brian constantly expresses isn't just pretentious philosophy, it's genuine existential horror from a being that shouldn't exist anymore, but does. The episode The Former Life of Brian, which aired on the 27th of April 2003 during Season 4, revealed that Brian has a son named Dylan from a previous relationship. Dylan lives with his mother Tracy, and Brian has been absent from his life. This episode should have been a turning point for Brian's character, a chance to confront his failures as a father and potentially grow. But after that episode, Dylan is rarely mentioned again. Brian continues his self-destructive patterns with minimal reference to the son he abandoned. If Brian is dead, this makes tragic sense. He's a ghost who can't truly connect with the living, even his own offspring. His failure as a father is complete because he literally can't be present in his son's life in any meaningful way. He's stuck haunting the Griffin family, unable to move forward or backward, while the people he should care about continue living without him. But there's an even darker interpretation of Brian's character that doesn't require him to be literally dead. This theory suggests that Brian's intellectualism, his entire persona as a cultured, sophisticated, politically aware individual, is an elaborate facade constructed to hide crushing unhappiness and complete cynicism about existence. In this reading, Brian isn't a genuine intellectual at all. He's a poser, someone who has learned to mimic the appearance of depth and intelligence to mask the emptiness inside. Throughout the series, Brian's pretensions are constantly exposed. He claims to be a writer, but he never finishes anything of value. His novel, Faster Than the Speed of Love, is revealed to be terrible, receiving awful reviews and selling poorly. When he tries to adapt it into a screenplay, the result is equally bad. He attends plays and lectures, not because he genuinely appreciates them, but because he wants to be seen as the type of person who attends such events. He dates women, not because he connects with them emotionally, but because he's desperately seeking validation. He quotes literature and philosophy, not from genuine understanding, but from a superficial desire to appear smart. The show has repeatedly demonstrated that Brian's knowledge is shallow. When pressed on topics he claims to care about, he often can't back up his positions with real arguments. His political views are performative, adopted because they make him feel superior, rather than from genuine conviction. His taste in art and culture is derivative, copying what he thinks intelligent people should like, rather than developing his own authentic preferences. Brian has built his entire identity around an image of who he wants to be, rather than accepting who he actually is. a dog pretending to be human, an average intelligence masquerading as genius, a fundamentally unhappy creature trying to convince himself and others that his life has meaning. This facade serves a crucial psychological function. If Brian accepted the reality of his existence, if he acknowledged that he's a pet living with a family that tolerates, rather than truly respects him, that his intellectual aspirations are delusions, and that his romantic pursuits are pathetic because he's literally a different species than the women he desires, he would have to confront the fundamental absurdity and hopelessness of his situation. The pretension isn't just annoying, it's necessary for his survival. Without it, Brian would have no reason to continue existing. The show has given us glimpses of what happens when Brian's facade cracks. In Brian, Portrait of a Dog, which aired on the 8th of May, 2005 during Season 4, Peter sends Brian to obedience school after he bites a person. The experience strips away Brian's human persona, forcing him to act like a real dog. He's humiliated, reduced to his animal nature, and only escapes by manipulating Peter's emotions. The episode reveals how tenuous Brian's human identity really is, how easily it can be stripped away to expose the dog beneath. If Brian is defined entirely by his facade, then being forced to acknowledge his true nature is a kind of death, an annihilation of self even more terrifying than physical death. This brings us to the most disturbing theory about Brian, that his various deaths throughout the series aren't accidents or plot devices, but canonical hints at his true fate. The theory proposes that Brian has been trying to kill himself throughout the entire series, and his deaths are successful attempts that get undone by the show's reset nature or by other characters intervening. In this interpretation, Brian is actively suicidal, constantly seeking escape from his unbearable existence, but he's trapped in a universe that won't let him die permanently. Look at the circumstances of Brian's deaths and near deaths throughout the series. Many of them result from his own reckless behavior or self-destructive choices. He puts himself in dangerous situations. He takes unnecessary risks, and he often seems cavalier about his own safety in ways that suggest he doesn't particularly value his life. The famous Season 12 death, where he's hit by a car, occurs because he's in the street and doesn't react quickly enough to get out of the way. A dog with a survival instinct would have avoided that car, but Brian doesn't. He lets it happen, and the result is his death. What makes this theory particularly chilling is the family's reaction to Brian's death. They grieve, genuinely and deeply, but they also move on remarkably quickly. Within episodes, they've replaced Brian with Vinny and seem to be adapting to life without him. This suggests that, on some level, the family was prepared for Brian's death, as if they'd been expecting it, or had come close to losing him before. When Stewie brings Brian back, the family is happy, but no one questions how it happened or addresses why Brian died in the first place. They simply accept his return and continue as if nothing happened, which could indicate that Brian's death and resurrection is part of a larger pattern the family has learned not to question. The episode Stewie Griffin, The Untold Story, included a sequence where future Stewie visits and reveals that Brian is dead in his timeline, having died from consuming too much alcohol. This wasn't played for laughs. It was presented as a genuine tragedy, a preventable death resulting from Brian's alcoholism that the family failed to stop. While this was technically an alternate timeline that got erased, it serves as a warning about Brian's trajectory. He's drinking himself to death slowly, and everyone knows it. But no one intervenes because they've accepted that Brian is on a path to self-destruction. Brian's relationship with Lois adds another layer of tragedy to his character. He's been in love with Lois since the show began, a fact that's been explicitly confirmed in multiple episodes. But this love is impossible. Lois is married to his best friend. She's a different species, and she's never shown genuine romantic interest in Brian. His love for Lois represents the ultimate unattainable desire, something he can never have but can't stop wanting. This hopeless love fuels his depression and his sense that life is fundamentally unfair and unsatisfying. In Play It Again, Brian, which aired on the 13th of March 2011 during season 9, Brian tries to seduce Lois by getting her drunk after she and Peter have a fight. He comes dangerously close to kissing her before Peter interrupts. This episode revealed the depths of Brian's obsession and his willingness to violate boundaries and friendships to get what he wants. When Peter discovers what almost happened, Brian is genuinely remorseful, recognizing that he's crossed a line. But the damage to his character is done. We've seen that Brian's love for Lois is twisted, selfish, and potentially predatory. He's not a romantic hero pining for his true love. He's a disturbed individual fixating on someone he can never have, letting that fixation poison his other relationships and his sense of self. The theory that Brian's deaths are suicidal gestures suggests that his unrequited love for Lois is one of the primary drivers of his self-destructive behavior. He's trapped in a household with the woman he loves, watching her with another man every day, unable to escape, but unable to have what he wants. This psychological torture would drive anyone to despair, but for Brian, who already struggles with depression and substance abuse, it creates an unbearable situation where death seems like the only release. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, we need to address the possibility that Brian's awareness of his own fictional nature adds another dimension to his suffering. Family Guy frequently breaks the fourth wall, acknowledging that it's a television show. Characters sometimes reference being on TV, mention episode numbers, or talk directly to the audience. Brian, being one of the more self-aware characters, would likely understand that he's a fictional creation, that his entire existence is for the entertainment of viewers, and that he has no free will because he's controlled by writers. Imagine the existential horror of knowing you're fictional. Every choice you make isn't really your choice. It's written by someone else. Every experience you have is manufactured for comedic effect. Every relationship you form is ultimately meaningless because none of it is real. Your suffering exists to make people laugh. This level of awareness would be psychologically devastating. If Brian understands that he's a character in a show, then his depression isn't just about his in-universe circumstances. It's about the fundamental nature of his existence. He's trapped in a narrative that will never allow him true happiness or growth because that wouldn't be funny. This meta-awareness could explain why Brian seems so resigned to his fate. He knows he can't really die permanently because the show needs him. He knows his character will never achieve his goals because failure is funnier than success. He knows his relationships will always fail because stable, healthy relationships don't generate comedy. This knowledge makes everything he does feel pointless. Why try to write a good novel when you know the writers will make it fail? Why pursue sobriety when you know the show will keep depicting you as an alcoholic? Why seek happiness when you're literally written to be miserable? The Season 12 death and resurrection take on new meaning when viewed through this lens. Brian's death was real within the show's continuity. He was gone for 2 full episodes. During that time, fans were genuinely upset, campaigning online for his return. The show received significant backlash for killing off such a beloved character. When Stewie brought Brian back, it wasn't just a victory for the character, it was the show's response to fan demand. But from Brian's perspective, if he's aware of being fictional, this would be horrifying. He achieved death, actual escape from his existence, only to be dragged back because the real-world audience wanted him to continue suffering for their entertainment. He's not just trapped in the show's universe. He's trapped by our desire to keep watching him. Some fan theories suggest that Brian's failed suicide attempts are subtle cries for help that no one in the family recognizes or responds to. His alcoholism is slowly killing him, but the family enables it by keeping alcohol around the house and rarely confronting him about his drinking. His depression is obvious to anyone paying attention, but no one suggests he get help. His risky behavior should concern his friends, but they just accept it as part of who Brian is. The family's failure to intervene could be interpreted as neglect, but it could also be something darker. Perhaps they know Brian is suicidal, but feel helpless to stop him. Or perhaps they've unconsciously accepted that Brian's death is inevitable, and they're just waiting for it to happen. The relationship between Brian and Stewie becomes especially tragic when you combine their theories. If Stewie is Brian's imaginary friend, created to cope with loneliness and depression, then Brian's suicide attempts become even more desperate. He's not just trying to escape his own suffering, he's trying to escape the prison of his own mind. But killing himself would also mean destroying Stewie, eliminating the one companion who truly understands him. This creates a horrible paradox. Brian can't live with his suffering, but he can't die without losing the only thing that makes his suffering bearable. He's trapped by his own coping mechanism. Alternatively, if Stewie is real and trapped in his own time loop, or suffering from his own mental illness, then Brian's relationship with him represents two deeply damaged individuals clinging to each other because no one else would understand their pain. Their adventures through time and dimensions aren't fun escapes. They're desperate attempts by two suicidal beings to find meaning or purpose anywhere in the multiverse. When they fail to find it, when every universe they visit is just as broken and hopeless as their own, it reinforces their despair. They're not exploring possibilities. They're confirming that suffering is universal, that there's no escape, no matter where or when they go. Brian's character has degraded significantly over the course of the series, much like Peter's. Early Brian was more genuine, more earnest in his beliefs, even if he was pretentious. Later, Brian is cruel, selfish, and hypocritical. He's hurt people intentionally, he's betrayed friends, and he's shown himself capable of genuine malice. This degradation could be read as the natural progression of a character whose facade is crumbling, whose depression is worsening, and whose grip on morality is loosening as he loses hope. If Brian is suicidal, his increasingly terrible behavior makes sense. Someone who's given up on life stops caring about consequences. Someone who hates themselves lashes out at others. Someone who sees no future stops investing in relationships. Brian isn't just becoming a worse person. He's actively destroying himself and his connections to others as a form of slow suicide. The ultimate tragedy of Brian Griffin is that he's smart enough to understand how trapped he is, but not strong enough to escape. He sees the bars of his cage clearly, whether those bars are his unrequited love for Lois, his status as a dog in a human world, his failure to achieve his dreams, his awareness of being fictional, or simply the grinding meaninglessness of existence in Quahog. He knows exactly what's wrong with his life, but knowledge doesn't equal power. Understanding your problems doesn't make them solvable. Brian is cursed with just enough intelligence to recognize his suffering, but not enough to transcend it, leaving him in a permanent state of aware agony that death promises to end, but the show's nature prevents from ever truly ending. If Brian and Stewie represent individual suffering and psychological horror, then Lois and Peter Griffin represent something even more disturbing. The possibility that two people can trap each other in mutual destruction, creating a hell of their own making that they're either unable or unwilling to escape. The marriage at the center of Family Guy isn't just dysfunctional, according to some of the darkest fan theories. It's a purgatorial loop where two souls punish each other eternally for sins neither can forgive or forget. The purgatory theory surrounding Lois and Peter's marriage suggests that their relationship isn't really a marriage at all in any conventional sense. It's a punishment, a cosmic sentence that forces them to remain together despite the obvious toxicity. despite the constant harm they inflict on each other and their children, despite every rational reason to separate. This theory proposes that Lois and Peter are actually dead, trapped in a hell specifically designed around their worst traits, forced to repeat the same destructive patterns forever, as penance for lives lived selfishly and harmfully. Consider the origins of their relationship as depicted in various flashback episodes. The story on page 1, which aired on the 11th of April 2000 during season 2, showed how Lois was initially engaged to someone else before meeting Peter. She came from a wealthy family, the Pewterschmidts, and was set up for a life of privilege and social status. Peter, meanwhile, was a working-class nobody with no prospects and limited intelligence. Their romance was depicted as passionate but impulsive, with Lois choosing Peter over her family's wishes and her own better judgment. Multiple episodes have explored their early relationship, and a consistent pattern emerges. Lois was attracted to Peter specifically because he represented everything her controlling, wealthy family despised. He was crude, unsophisticated, and poor. Dating and marrying Peter was an act of rebellion, a way for Lois to assert her independence from her domineering father, Carter Pewterschmidt. But rebellion as a foundation for marriage is inherently unstable. If Lois chose Peter primarily to defy her family, rather than because he was truly the right partner for her, then their entire relationship is built on spite rather than love. The purgatory theory suggests that both Lois and Peter are being punished for this original sin. Lois for marrying someone out of rebellion and vanity rather than genuine compatibility, and Peter for allowing himself to be used as a weapon in someone else's family drama. They're forced to live out the consequences of that impulsive, selfish decision for eternity. Their marriage isn't allowed to improve or end because the point isn't happiness, it's punishment. They're trapped in the worst version of what their relationship could become, unable to grow, unable to leave, unable to find peace. This explains why their marriage survives situations that would destroy any real relationship. Peter has cheated on Lois, endangered her life, spent their money recklessly, destroyed their home repeatedly, and subjected her to constant humiliation. Lois has cheated on Peter, lied to him, manipulated him, and shown contempt for him in countless ways. In Partial Terms of Endearment, which aired on the 21st of June 2009 during season 8, Lois seriously considered having another man's baby without Peter's knowledge. In The Giggity Wife, from season 11, which aired on the 17th of February 2013, Peter actively tried to break up his friend's marriage because he was jealous. These aren't the actions of people in a healthy marriage, yet they stay together. The show occasionally acknowledges how wrong their relationship is. In Screams of Silence, the story of Brenda Q, the serious domestic violence episode mentioned earlier, the family helps Joe's new neighbor Brenda escape her abusive boyfriend Jeff. The entire episode is played straight, with virtually no comedy, showing the horror of domestic violence and the courage needed to escape it. But the uncomfortable subtext is that Peter and Lois's relationship contains many of the same toxic elements, just played for laughs in other episodes. Peter has physically harmed Lois, controlled her decisions, and exhibited the same jealous, possessive behavior that Jeff shows toward Brenda. The difference is tone, not substance. If Lois and Peter are in purgatory, this episode represents a moment where they're forced to confront what their relationship actually is by seeing it reflected in someone else's suffering. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this theory is the idea that Lois and Peter are aware of their purgatorial state and have accepted it. They know their marriage is terrible. They know they hurt each other. They've both had opportunities to leave, moments where divorce seemed imminent. Yet they always come back together, not out of love, but out of recognition that this is their fate. They're punishing each other because on some level, they believe they deserve to be punished, and they've found in each other the perfect instrument of mutual torment. This brings us to another unsettling theory about Peter specifically. that his stupidity isn't real. According to this interpretation, Peter is actually intelligent, possibly even highly intelligent, but he's performing stupidity as a calculated act of manipulation. This theory might sound absurd given how consistently idiotic Peter's behavior is throughout the series, but there's compelling evidence that Peter's intelligence fluctuates in ways that suggest deliberate acting rather than genuine cognitive limitation. Consider the episodes where Peter demonstrates unexpected competence. In Business Guy, which aired on the 15th of November 2009 during Season 8, Peter takes over his father-in-law's company and actually runs it successfully for a while, making shrewd business decisions and understanding complex financial concepts. In The Story of Brenda Q mentioned earlier, Peter orchestrates a complex plan to save Brenda from her abuser, showing tactical thinking and emotional intelligence. In various other episodes, Peter displays knowledge of history, literature, and culture that he shouldn't possess if he were truly as stupid as he appears. The calculated stupidity theory proposes that Peter learned early in his relationship with Lois that playing dumb gave him power. If Lois thinks Peter is too stupid to function, she has to take care of everything. She has to make the decisions, handle the responsibilities, and manage the family. This means Peter faces no real consequences for his actions because everyone assumes he didn't know any better. It's the perfect excuse for selfish behavior, claim incompetence, and avoid accountability. This theory transforms Peter from a lovable idiot into a manipulative monster. Every destructive decision, every cruel act, every moment of apparent thoughtlessness becomes a calculated choice. When Peter forgets important events, he's actually choosing to ignore them. When he doesn't understand why his actions hurt people, he's actually pretending not to understand, to avoid taking responsibility. When he makes terrible decisions, he's actually making selfish decisions and using his reputation for stupidity as cover. The evidence for this becomes even more disturbing when you examine how selectively Peter's stupidity manifests. He's too dumb to remember his anniversary, but smart enough to orchestrate elaborate schemes to get what he wants. He can't understand basic social cues, but can manipulate his friends into doing what he wants. He lacks common sense about safety, but shows sophisticated understanding of how to avoid consequences for his actions. This selective incompetence is actually a common tactic used by manipulators. Perform helplessness in areas where you don't want responsibility, while maintaining competence in areas that serve your interests. If Peter is faking his stupidity, then Lois is his primary victim. She's spent decades taking care of a man who doesn't actually need taking care of, shouldering burdens that Peter could handle himself if he chose to, and accepting a diminished life because she believes her husband is incapable of being a true partner. The manipulation is comprehensive and devastating. Peter has successfully convinced Lois, his children, his friends, and the entire town that he's too stupid to be held to normal standards of behavior, giving him license to do whatever he wants without facing real consequences. But here's where the theory gets even darker. What if Lois knows? What if Lois has figured out that Peter is faking his stupidity, but chooses to pretend she doesn't know? This would make their relationship even more twisted. A game where both parties are performing for each other, each pretending to believe the other's act, because the alternative is confronting the horrible truth about their marriage. This connects to the theory that Lois isn't happy. She's just exceptionally skilled at maintaining a facade of normalcy. Throughout the series, we've seen glimpses beneath Lois's surface that suggest deep unhappiness, rage, and despair. In Lego My Mego, which aired on the 29th of March, 2015, during Season 13, Lois becomes addicted to painkillers after an injury, revealing how easily she could slide into substance abuse. In Back to the Pilot, when past Lois sees her future self, she's horrified by what she's become. Multiple episodes have shown Lois breaking down, losing control, and revealing the strain of holding everything together. The facade theory suggests that Lois is performing happiness and contentment as a survival mechanism. She came from a dysfunctional wealthy family where appearance mattered more than reality, where emotions were controlled and authentic connection was discouraged. She learned early that showing your true feelings was dangerous, that vulnerability would be exploited, and that maintaining a perfect exterior was essential to survival. She brought these lessons into her marriage with Peter, constructing an elaborate performance of the satisfied housewife and mother, even as her real self suffocates beneath the role. This performance requires constant effort and creates constant stress. Lois has to suppress her intelligence, her talents, and her legitimate anger at her circumstances. She was a talented pianist who gave up her dreams. She had ambitions beyond being a housewife. She's smarter and more capable than almost everyone in her family, yet she's stuck managing the chaos they create. The rage this would generate has to go somewhere, and the show has depicted Lois taking out her frustration in disturbing ways. Lois's relationship with Meg becomes horrifying when viewed through this lens. Meg represents everything Lois fears about herself. A girl who doesn't fit in, who isn't valued, who struggles to find love and acceptance. By participating in Meg's abuse, by actively contributing to her daughter's misery, Lois is attempting to destroy the parts of herself that she hates. Meg is the scapegoat for Lois's self-loathing, a convenient target for all the anger and disappointment Lois can't direct at its real sources, her husband, her father, and ultimately herself for the choices that led her to this life. The episode Seahorse Seashell Party, which aired on the 25th of September 2011 during season 10, features a storyline where Meg finally snaps and confronts the family about their treatment of her. She delivers a devastating speech detailing all the ways they've abused her, and the family is forced to acknowledge their cruelty. But then Meg takes it back, claiming that the family needs her as a lightning rod for their dysfunction, that without someone to abuse, they would turn on each other and destroy themselves. The family accepts this rationalization, and everything goes back to normal. This episode reveals the dark heart of the Griffin family dynamic. They're aware of the abuse. They know it's wrong, but they continue it because it serves a function. Meg absorbs the family's toxicity so that Lois and Peter don't have to confront their failing marriage, so that Chris doesn't have to face his own insecurities, so that Stewie and Brian can feel superior to someone. The family has made a collective, if mostly unconscious, decision to sacrifice Meg's well-being for their own psychological comfort. This isn't just dysfunction. It's a deliberate choice to harm an innocent person to maintain a broken system. Lois's participation in this system is particularly cruel because as Meg's mother, she has a responsibility to protect her daughter. Instead, she's often the ringleader of Meg's humiliation. She's made cruel comments about Meg's appearance, dismissed her feelings, and failed to defend her when others attack her. If Lois is maintaining a facade of normalcy, then Meg represents the truth that could shatter that facade. Meg's visible unhappiness is evidence that the family isn't working, that Lois has failed as a mother, that the life Lois is pretending to love is actually unbearable. By keeping Meg miserable, Lois ensures that her own misery remains invisible by comparison. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, the sexual dynamics between Lois and Peter add another disturbing dimension to their relationship. The show frequently depicts their sex life as active and enthusiastic, one of the few areas where they seem genuinely compatible. But multiple episodes have shown that their sexual relationship is just as dysfunctional as every other aspect of their marriage. Lois has used sex as a weapon to manipulate Peter. Peter has pressured Lois into sexual situations she wasn't comfortable with. Both have been unfaithful. Their sexual compatibility isn't evidence of a healthy relationship. It's another form of their mutual dysfunction, a way they use each other for physical gratification while emotionally destroying each other. Some fan theories suggest that Lois's continued attraction to Peter, despite everything, is evidence of trauma bonding. Trauma bonding occurs in abusive relationships where the victim becomes psychologically attached to their abuser through cycles of abuse and reconciliation. The periodic moments of kindness or normalcy create powerful emotional connections that make it extremely difficult to leave even when the relationship is clearly harmful. If Peter is manipulating Lois through his performance of stupidity, and if Lois has experienced genuine trauma from Peter's behavior, then her inability to leave might not be weakness or love, but the predictable result of psychological abuse. Alternatively, both Lois and Peter might be trauma bonded to each other, locked in a codependent relationship where they're simultaneously victim and abuser. They hurt each other, then reconcile, then hurt each other again in an endless cycle. Neither can leave because they've become addicted to the cycle itself, to the highs and lows of their toxic relationship. They don't stay together because they love each other, but because they literally can't function apart anymore. They've become so enmeshed in each other's dysfunction that separation would mean losing their sense of identity entirely. The show has hinted at this codependency in episodes where Lois and Peter temporarily separate. Invariably, they both fall apart without each other. Peter becomes even more destructive and helpless. Lois becomes depressed and unable to enjoy her freedom. They always end up back together, often with minimal actual resolution of whatever caused the separation. This pattern suggests that they're not choosing to be together out of love, but out of mutual need, a need that's been created and reinforced by years of shared dysfunction. There's also a disturbing theory that Lois is only staying in the marriage for financial security. Despite Peter's many job changes and financial disasters, the family somehow always maintains their house and standard of living. This is often explained by Lois's wealthy father bailing them out, but it raises questions about Lois's true motivations. If Lois is dependent on her family's wealth, and if staying married to Peter is somehow a condition of receiving that support, then she might be trapped in the marriage not by love or trauma bonding, but by practical economics. She can't afford to leave because doing so would mean losing the financial safety net her father provides. This economic theory becomes more disturbing when you consider that it would mean Lois has sold herself, accepting abuse and unhappiness in exchange for material comfort. It would mean she's valuing money over her own well-being and that of her children. It would transform her from a victim or a codependent partner into someone who's actively choosing to stay in a harmful situation for selfish reasons. The facade of normalcy she maintains would then be not just a psychological defense mechanism, but a calculated performance to justify her choices and maintain the flow of money from her father. Peter's own motivations for staying in the marriage are equally dark. If he's faking his stupidity and manipulating Lois, then he's staying because the arrangement benefits him. He gets to do whatever he wants without consequences. He has someone to manage his life and responsibilities. He gets regular sexual gratification, and he maintains social standing as a married man with a family. He's using Lois as thoroughly as she might be using him, just in different ways. Their marriage isn't a partnership. It's a transaction where both parties are exploiting each other. Some theories suggest that Peter's cruelty toward Lois has escalated over the seasons because he's testing to see how much he can get away with. Each season, he pushes the boundaries a little further, engaging in more extreme behavior, causing more harm, showing less remorse. This isn't character degradation due to poor writing. In this interpretation, it's Peter's deliberate strategy to establish dominance in the relationship. By normalizing increasingly terrible behavior, he ensures that Lois's standards keep dropping, that she accepts worse and worse treatment until she has no standards left at all. It's a systematic campaign of psychological abuse designed to break down Lois's resistance and self-worth. The children become collateral damage in this war between their parents. Meg, Chris, and Stewie are all damaged by Lois and Peter's toxic relationship, each in different ways. They're growing up in an environment where abuse is normalized, where manipulation is standard, where genuine emotional connection is rare. The show plays this for comedy, but the implications are genuinely horrifying. These children are being psychologically destroyed by parents who are too caught up in their own dysfunction to notice or care about the harm they're causing. The theory that Lois and Peter are trapped in purgatory, punishing each other eternally, becomes almost comforting compared to the alternative. That they're choosing this. That they could leave or change, but won't because some dark part of them wants to continue hurting each other. Maybe the punishment isn't being forced to stay together. Maybe the punishment is being given the freedom to leave and choosing to stay anyway. Choosing dysfunction over health. Choosing mutual destruction over growth. Choosing to hurt each other rather than face the terrifying vulnerability of actually trying to love. We've examined the individual horrors of Stewie's existence, Brian's quiet desperation, and the toxic marriage between Lois and Peter. But these personal tragedies might be symptoms of something far larger and more disturbing. Some fan theories suggest that Quahog itself exists within a broader animated universe that operates under sinister rules, or that the entire show is a commentary on humanity's worst traits reflected back at us through the distorted mirror of animation. The most unsettling possibility of all is that we, the viewers, are the true villains in this story, perpetuating the Griffin family's suffering through our continued consumption of their pain. The multiverse theory of Family Guy proposes that Quahog isn't just one town in one reality, but rather a nexus point where multiple realities intersect and overlap. This theory draws heavily on episodes that explicitly deal with alternate dimensions and parallel universes, particularly the Road to episodes we discussed earlier. Road to the Multiverse showed Stewie and Brian traveling through wildly different versions of reality, from a universe where everyone looked like they were drawn by Disney animators, to a world where humans and dogs had switched roles, to a universe where Christianity never existed and the Dark Ages continued indefinitely. The episode presents these alternate universes as discrete, separate realities that Stewie and Brian visit and leave behind. But what if the boundaries between these universes aren't as solid as they appear? What if Quahog exists at a point where these realities bleed into each other, causing the constant inconsistencies, impossible events, and reality-breaking moments that define Family Guy? This would explain why the show's continuity is so fractured, why characters can die and return, why major life events are forgotten, and why the laws of physics seem to apply only when convenient. In this interpretation, every episode of Family Guy is actually taking place in a slightly different universe. The Griffins we watch in one episode aren't quite the same Griffins in the next episode, because they're literally different versions from parallel dimensions. This is why Peter can be a good father in one episode and an abusive monster in the next. They're not the same Peter. This is why characters' personalities shift so dramatically across seasons. They're not evolving or devolving, they're simply different iterations of the same basic character template existing in slightly different realities. The multiverse theory becomes truly disturbing when you consider what it means for character consciousness and identity. If the Griffins are constantly sliding between parallel universes, are they aware of it? Do they retain memories from other dimensions? Or is each version a completely separate consciousness, unaware that countless other versions of themselves exist simultaneously? The show has hinted at this awareness in episodes where characters reference things that happened in other episodes, even when those events should have been reset or forgotten according to the show's normal continuity. The Simpsons Guy, a crossover episode that aired on the 28th of September 2014 during season 13, showed the Griffin family meeting the Simpsons in Springfield. While this was primarily a comedic crossover event, it established that the Simpsons and Family Guy exist in the same multiverse, that these animated universes can interact and overlap. If we extend this logic, it suggests that every animated sitcom, every cartoon universe, exist in the same larger multiverse. Family Guy, The Simpsons, American Dad, Bob's Burgers, and countless other animated shows are all part of one cohesive reality structure. But here's where it gets dark. If all these shows exist in the same multiverse, then they're all subject to the same existential horror. The characters in The Simpsons have been trapped at the same ages for over 3 decades. The characters in South Park die and resurrect constantly. The multiverse theory suggests that animated characters across all shows are prisoners of the same system, a system that won't let them age, grow, escape, or die permanently. They're all trapped in eternal loops tailored to their specific shows, variations on the same cosmic punishment. This brings us to the theory that Family Guy is a deliberate commentary on the cyclical nature of human flaws. The show has run for 22 seasons and over 400 episodes, and in all that time, no one has truly grown or changed. Peter is still stupid and selfish. Lois is still long-suffering and occasionally vindictive. Brian is still depressed and pretentious. Stewie is still an infant with unclear motivations. Meg is still abused. Chris is still overlooked. The family's situation never improves. They never learn from their mistakes. Every episode ends with a reset button pressed, returning them to their baseline dysfunction. This repetition isn't just a requirement of the sitcom format. According to this theory, it's the point. Family Guy is showing us that humans are fundamentally incapable of growth, that we're doomed to repeat the same mistakes across generations, that our worst traits aren't bugs in the human operating system, but core features that can never be removed or improved. The Griffins aren't learning and growing because Seth MacFarlane and his writers are arguing that people don't actually learn and grow in real life either. We just convince ourselves we do, while repeating the same patterns with minor variations. Look at how the show treats serious issues and character development. Multiple episodes have featured moments where characters appear to have genuine breakthroughs or learning experiences. Peter has realized he's been a bad father and husband. Lois has confronted her enabling behavior. Brian has acknowledged his pretensions. Stewie has shown genuine emotional vulnerability. But these moments of growth are always abandoned by the next episode. The character who learned an important lesson in one episode will commit the same error in the next episode as if the learning never happened. This isn't just inconsistent writing, the commentary theory argues. It's a deliberate statement about human nature. We have insights, we make resolutions, we promise to change, and then we don't. We fall back into comfortable patterns because change is hard and growth is painful, and it's easier to stay broken in familiar ways than to risk becoming different. The Griffins aren't trapped in repetitive storylines because the writers are lazy. They're trapped because the show is arguing that everyone is trapped, that the cycles we complain about in fiction are just reflections of the cycles we're stuck in during our real lives. The show's treatment of consequences supports this theory. In real life, actions have consequences that accumulate over time. If you consistently make terrible decisions, your life gradually gets worse. If you abuse people, they eventually leave. If you destroy property, you face legal repercussions. But in Family Guy, consequences are temporary at best and non-existent at worst. Peter can blow up his house, and it's rebuilt by the next episode. He can commit serious crimes and face no jail time. He can alienate everyone around him, and they all forgive him almost immediately. This lack of consequences could be read as simple cartoon logic, but the commentary theory suggests it's saying something darker. That in real life, many people, especially those with privilege and power, also face no real consequences for their actions. Peter is a white man in America. He can get away with things that others couldn't, because the system is designed to protect people like him. The show isn't failing to depict consequences. It's accurately depicting how consequence-free life can be for certain demographics, how the systems meant to enforce accountability often fail, how justice is frequently absent or delayed or selectively applied. The endless nature of the show itself becomes part of the commentary. Family Guy was canceled once and then brought back due to strong DVD sales and cable syndication ratings. This resurrection from cancellation happened in 2005, and the show explicitly acknowledged it, with characters making jokes about being canceled and returning. Since then, Family Guy has continued for nearly 2 decades more, long past the point where most shows would have ended. It keeps going, season after season, long after it arguably ran out of fresh things to say. Why does it continue? The cynical answer is money. As long as Family Guy generates revenue, it will keep being produced. But the commentary theory suggests there's a deeper meaning. The show continues because it's trapped in the same cycle it's depicting. It can't end because ending would suggest resolution, growth, completion. The show about people who can't change must itself never change, never end, never resolve. It has to keep going forever, or at least until external forces finally kill it, because that's what happens to people too. We don't choose to stop our destructive patterns. They only stop when we die, or when something outside ourselves intervenes. This leads to the most disturbing fan theory of all, that we, the audience, are the true villains. This meta-theory proposes that the characters in Family Guy are aware they're in a television show, aware they exist to entertain viewers, and aware that their suffering continues because we keep watching. Every time we tune in, every time we stream an episode, every time we laugh at their pain, we're voting for their torment to continue. We're the cosmic force that won't let them escape, change, or end. The show has broken the fourth wall countless times, with characters directly addressing the audience, acknowledging they're in a TV show, and commenting on their own fictional nature. These moments are usually played for laughs, quick jokes about being animated, or references to episode numbers, or network executives. But what if these fourth wall breaks are actually cries for help? What if the characters are trying to communicate with us, to make us understand that we have the power to end their suffering by simply stopping our consumption of their pain? Consider the implications of this theory. Every episode we watch is an episode where the Griffin family is forced to suffer through another adventure that will go nowhere and teach them nothing. Every laugh we give to their misery is validation that their pain is entertaining. Every season, renewal that results from strong ratings is another year of imprisonment for characters who can't die, can't grow, and can't escape. We're not innocent viewers. We're jailers, forcing these animated constructs to perform their dysfunction for our amusement indefinitely. The meta-commentary becomes especially disturbing when you consider episodes that dealt with serious topics. Screams of Silence, The Story of Brenda Q, the domestic violence episode, asked viewers to take abuse seriously and help victims escape dangerous situations. But the same show that made this serious statement also regularly depicts domestic abuse between Peter and Lois as comedy. The same show that asked us to care about Brenda also asks us to laugh at Meg's suffering. This isn't hypocrisy, according to the meta-theory. It's the show trying to wake us up, to make us realize that we're complicit in normalizing the very behaviors we claim to condemn. Family Guy has always been controversial for its offensive humor. The show makes jokes about race, religion, gender, sexuality, disability, tragedy, and virtually every other sensitive topic imaginable. Critics have accused it of being needlessly cruel, of punching down, of using shock value instead of genuine wit. Defenders argue that the show is satirizing these attitudes, that it's mocking the type of person who would find such humor acceptable. But the meta-theory suggests a third interpretation. The show is forcing us to confront our own complicity in consuming offensive content while claiming to be good people. When we watch Family Guy and laugh at jokes we know are wrong, we're revealing something about ourselves. We're demonstrating that our moral standards have limits, that we can be entertained by cruelty if it's presented in the right format. The show isn't making us into bad people. It's revealing that we already were willing to compromise our values for entertainment. Every offensive joke that makes us laugh is evidence that we prioritize our own amusement over the principles we claim to hold. The show is holding up a mirror, and we don't like what we see reflected back. Before we move on, make sure to subscribe if you're enjoying this breakdown. Moving on, there's a related theory that suggests Family Guy is actually a hell specifically designed for us, the viewers, not for the characters. In this interpretation, we're the ones being punished, forced to watch the same patterns repeat endlessly, seeing characters we might have once cared about degrade into worse versions of themselves, unable to look away even as we realize there's nothing left worth watching. The show continues not because the characters are trapped, but because we are addicted to content, unable to stop consuming, even when consumption brings no real pleasure or value. This theory points to the phenomenon of hate watching, where people continue watching shows they claim to dislike. Family Guy has a substantial audience of people who regularly watch the show while simultaneously criticizing it online, complaining about declining quality, insisting the show should have ended years ago. Yet they keep watching. They can't stop. This isn't loyalty or hope that it will improve. It's compulsion, addiction, an inability to break free from a pattern even when it's unrewarding. If hell is repetition without meaning, then these viewers are in hell, and Family Guy is their punishment. The show's relationship with nostalgia adds another layer to this theory. Many viewers first discovered Family Guy during their teenage years or early 20s, a formative period when media consumption helps shape identity. As these viewers age, Family Guy becomes associated with their youth, with simpler times, with versions of themselves they can never return to. Continuing to watch isn't about enjoying the current episodes. It's about trying to recapture something that's gone. The show knows this and occasionally exploits it, bringing back old references and callbacks to earlier seasons, giving viewers brief hits of nostalgia that keep them hooked. But nostalgia is a trap, a form of voluntary imprisonment where we chain ourselves to the past and refuse to move forward. By continuing to watch Family Guy out of nostalgia, viewers are demonstrating the same inability to grow and change that the show depicts in its characters. We're all Griffins, stuck in our own loops, returning to the same comfortable dysfunctions rather than risking the uncertainty of actual change. The show isn't just commentary on the human condition, it's a participatory demonstration of it, with the audience unknowingly acting out the very themes the show explores. There's also a theory about the animation style itself being significant. Family Guy's animation is relatively simple and stiff compared to many other animated shows. Characters have limited facial expressions, movements can feel robotic, and the overall aesthetic is flat and somewhat lifeless. This could just be a budget consideration or stylistic choice, but some theorists argue it's intentional, meant to emphasize the artificiality and emptiness of the world being depicted. The characters look like puppets because they are puppets, animated constructs with no inner life beyond what we project onto them. This theory suggests that the show's visual style is constantly reminding us that none of this is real, that we're watching drawings move and speak, that any emotional investment we have in these characters is misplaced. By making the animation slightly off-putting, slightly wrong, the show prevents us from fully immersing in the illusion. We're always aware we're watching a cartoon, which means we're always aware of our role as observers and consumers. We can't hide behind the excuse that we forgot it wasn't real. The show's style won't let us forget. The cutaway gags, Family Guy's signature storytelling device, take on new meaning in this framework. These random interruptions that transport us to different times, places, and scenarios aren't just comedic tools. They're representations of fractured consciousness, of minds that can't maintain linear narrative because they're too damaged or too aware of their own fictional nature. Every cutaway is a moment where the show's reality breaks down, where the pretense of coherent storytelling is abandoned in favor of pure chaos. The characters live in a world where reality can shatter at any moment, where their experiences can be interrupted and replaced with something completely unrelated, where continuity and consequence are always one cutaway away from being abandoned entirely. If you live in a reality where the narrative can be interrupted at any moment, where your experiences and memories might be randomly replaced with completely different scenarios, you develop severe psychological problems. You couldn't form stable identity or relationships. You couldn't trust your own memories or perceptions. You'd be in a constant state of disorientation and anxiety. The cutaway gags aren't just annoying interruptions to the story. They're evidence that the Griffin family lives in a fundamentally unstable reality that would drive any conscious being insane. The show's treatment of death and violence supports this instability theory. Family Guy features extreme violence regularly, from the chicken fights to Peter's constant injuries, to the various characters who die in cutaway gags. But this violence has no lasting impact. Bodies heal instantly. Dead characters return without explanation, and trauma is never addressed. This could be cartoon logic, but it could also be evidence that the show's reality is so broken that concepts like death and injury have become meaningless. In a world where nothing is permanent and consequences don't exist, violence becomes just another form of chaos, indistinguishable from any other event. Some theories suggest that Quahog is actually a form of shared delusion, a collective hallucination generated by severely traumatized minds. Every character in Quahog is actually a patient in a psychiatric facility, and the town itself is a shared fantasy world they've created to escape their real circumstances. This would explain why everyone in Quahog is so profoundly dysfunctional. They're not actually functioning members of society. They're severely mentally ill patients whose delusions have somehow synchronized, creating a consistent shared reality where their various traumas and disorders can play out safely. In this interpretation, Peter's stupidity is a dissociative response to trauma. Lois's facade is a learned behavior from severe abuse. Meg's victimization is her manifesting her own self-hatred externally. Chris's dimness is a protective cognitive shutdown. Stewie's genius and violence are symptoms of a severely disturbed young mind processing unprocessable abuse. Brian's depression and alcoholism are direct results of abandonment and mistreatment. They're not characters in a sitcom. They're patients in a facility. And Quahog is the shared delusion that keeps them from having to face whatever terrible realities actually broke them. This theory explains the town's impossible nature, its contradictory geography, its population of similarly broken individuals, and its resistance to normal cause and effect. It's not a real place bound by real rules. It's a fantasy construct maintained by damaged psyches. And like all delusions, it's full of inconsistencies and impossibilities that go unquestioned, because questioning them would mean confronting reality. The show we watch is actually a documentary of sorts, a depiction of how these patients see their shared delusional world, presented as comedy to make it palatable for viewers who couldn't handle the raw reality of severe mental illness. The reason Family Guy can never end, why the characters can never grow, why nothing ever truly changes, is because these patients can never heal. Their traumas are too severe, their damage too fundamental. The best they can do is maintain the delusion of Quahog, a place where they can act out their issues without facing the real consequences that real life would impose. The show continuing forever isn't entertainment, it's tragedy. It's watching people who can never escape their mental prisons, who will repeat these same patterns until they die, who are too broken to ever be whole again. All of these theories, from the multiverse to the meta-commentary to the shared delusion, point toward one central truth. Family Guy is not a show about a wacky family having adventures. It's a show about suffering, about imprisonment, about the impossibility of escape or growth or redemption. Whether the prison is a time loop, a purgatorial punishment, a broken reality, or our own continued consumption of their pain, the Griffin family is trapped, and we've been watching them suffer for over 2 decades, laughing at their pain, consuming their misery as entertainment, and calling it comedy. The most unsettling realization is that these theories might all be true simultaneously. Stewie might be trapped in a time loop while also being Brian's hallucination, while also suffering from mental illness. Brian might be dead while also being suicidal, while also being aware he's fictional. Lois and Peter might be in purgatory, while also choosing their dysfunction, while also performing for our entertainment. Quahog might exist in a multiverse, while also being a shared delusion, while also being a commentary on human nature. The contradictions don't cancel each other out. They compound, creating layers of horror stacked on top of each other. This is perhaps the truest thing about Family Guy. It contains multitudes of darkness, endless variations on the theme of suffering, infinite ways to interpret the pain on display. Every theory we've explored reveals another dimension of the show's bleakness, another way to understand the tragedy disguised as comedy. The genius of Family Guy, if we can call it that, is how it hides all this darkness in plain sight, making us laugh while showing us horrors, entertaining us with a chronicle of despair so thorough and comprehensive that we don't even notice we're watching animated characters experience every form of suffering and imprisonment imaginable. The Griffin family will continue their cycles. Stewie will stay an infant forever, building impossible machines that never free him. Brian will remain depressed, drinking himself toward a death that never quite arrives. Lois and Peter will hurt each other eternally, trapped in a marriage that can't end. Meg will absorb abuse until she becomes the abuse. Chris will fade into irrelevance, forgotten even by the show that created him. Quahog will spin on, a town that shouldn't exist, populated by people who can't escape. All of it playing out for our entertainment, again and again, forever. Or at least until the ratings finally drop enough that the network cancels the show and puts these characters out of their misery. But even then, in reruns and streaming, they'll continue suffering, continue cycling, continue trapped, because we can always press play and force them to perform their pain one more time. And we will. We always do. That might be the darkest truth of all.